Hello, welcome back to my channel. It is my hope that you are doing well. Please make yourself comfortable. We are going to talk about hip hop today. I want to talk about this book called Check It While I Wreck It, written by Gwendolyn Pugh. This book focuses on Black womanhood, hip hop culture, and the public sphere. I really loved reading this book because, listen, I am a hip hop head. I love rap music, and I have to admit that my position as a black woman and as a listener, a fan of rap music, has sometimes been perplexing and a little bit tense. But this is something that I will be able to explore and discuss throughout this book discussion. I genuinely believe that this fantastic book is an enriching discussion about Black women and their contributions to hip hop culture. So, this book is about this groundbreaking, culturally defining movement that emerged in the south of Bronx toward the end of the 1970s. With this book, the aim of the author is not really to create an anthology, but rather to unpack how Black women have used language, rhythm, their own stories, and resistance in order to claim a space in hip hop culture, in spite of all the challenges and all the hurdles. In this book, Gwendolyn explores how women are taking a stance and whether their growth is being supported or inhibited within hip hop culture. So, this book is really informative for hip hop lovers and for all the people who are interested in reflecting on how women are navigating their space within hip hop, how they are operating within the culture, and for people who want to reflect on whether women's voices are being trivialized or amplified? This is actually a very good question to ask, and there has always been this tension regarding the position of women within hip hop culture. Of course, this is a big, huge task, but I believe that the work was very well done, and I believe the author handled this very difficult discussion with honesty, with a lot of diligent research and care. You can clearly see when you read the book that the author is a hip hop lover and she has been conflicted about the messages in some of the rap songs that have been heavily commercialized, just like I have been. However, this is not a cold, overbearing academic piece of work dissecting hip hop from a distance. I feel like the author really steps into the cipher. This is a work of research that is rich, and we can see that the author, is really passionate about hip hop and really knowledgeable. So it really makes you want to read the book. So, one thing I really loved is the perspective of the author. As a woman and as an academic, she doesn't approach hip hop from a perspective of victimhood, but rather she calls for a better representation of women within the movement. And she also calls for women's voices to be amplified within the movements. As someone who is really curious and who loves to learn about anything, I really loved the fact that the author goes beyond hip hop and explores literature and significant social movements, most of them related to African American history. So I loved it. Please bear in mind that this book was published some time ago, so don't expect to read about the Cardi B's, the Rhapsodies in this book, okay? It was published in 2004. Okay, so bear this in mind. This is very important. I'm going to make a breakdown based on chapter, but in a thematic way. It's going to be thematically organized. So I am going to talk about chapter one. And on chapter one, we talk about hip hop. What is hip hop? So to understand hip hop, you have to understand the moment. We have to go back in the 70s and even think about what happened for African Americans before the 60s and the 70s. So let's focus on the 70s first. So you have to think about post industrial decline, work gone, jobs gone. The state has checked out because we are moving toward neoliberalism, which means that the state is moving back from what it used to do for its citizens. So providing health care, providing basically anything a strong welfare state is supposed to do. Neoliberalism called for state withdrawal, with what it implies for communities, especially communities that were more vulnerable. The state is really here to support the market, and at the same time, the state is asked to pull back from housing, education, healthcare, and social services. That means that the most vulnerable communities are left to fend for themselves, and they have to navigate financial insecurity, scarcity, instability with fewer resources and less support, as well as less protections. So yeah, 1970s, we have a big shock. We have this idea that the markets should replace the states, and we have a lot of privatization in the United States. The state checked out, federal resources checked out. You also have to bear in mind that at the time, a lot of generations were now settled in the north of the United States, and this as a result of the Great Migration from African Americans from the southern part of the United States toward the northern parts. But after the Great Migration, a subtle sense of disillusion crept up. The Great Migration promised freedom and prosperity up north, but it delivered new form of neglect and a different type of poverty. That's also without mentioning the difficulty to adapt to a new environment, the difficulty to rearrange community links, community ties in a different environment. The dream of the North cracked. So this is where we are at the end of the 1970s. Not to say that everything was dark, but at the moment, that was the situation. So black communities up north turned to something they've always had: resilience, community, and creativity, with a good dose of talent. Hip hop became survival. It also became leisure. It became artistic expression. It became a quest for freedom, for self affirmation, for assertion. It was also a way to say and to shout out musically, we are going to find a way out and you're going to have to respect it. It was a way for the youth to create something better for themselves with the little resources they had at the time due to the state withdrawal. Now we get to the historical and cultural bit in chapter 1, and I loved it, you know me. So, the author traces the lineage of hip hop in African oral and musical tradition. We can also trace the roots of hip hop within African American culture and traditions, such as Negro spirituals, jazz music, the blues, R&B, and spoken words. It's part of a continuum of resistance, rhythm, and storytelling. The author also mentions the Harlem Renaissance and the Black Arts movement. So, at the beginning, hip hop was and still is very important because it was a way for African American people to access the public sphere. It was a way to express social grievances and to reclaim a space from which they long had been excluded and silenced. In this regard, the author mentions the social theory of the public sphere by Habermas, and it's very well explained. Now, the public sphere, accessing the public sphere is great, but the author also reminds us that at the time it came with a heavy price. It was a lot of pressure to be a black person in the public sphere. There was an expectation of excellence, a visible pressure to represent an entire race, the pressure to combat and challenge the stereotypes, and it's a big challenge. It was important. It was about freedom. It was about humanity. It was about dignity. And this expectation of excellence, this expectation of being able to be a dignified spokesperson for the community, echoes the idea of W.E.B. Du Bois of the Talented Tenth. This is very well explained in the book. Please have a look. This is so interesting and informative. So all of this is linked to hip hop because here we're trying to see the context surrounding hip hop. We are trying to understand the cultural history that preceded hip hop and the implication for the African American community. So now we can understand why Hip hop came out as a place for enjoyment, creativity, artistic expression, but it was also beyond the recreational aspect, an opportunity to claim a place. It was an opportunity for the youth from the African American communities and the Latino communities to have their voices heard. Hip hop extended its mission. It was not just entertainment, it was also social commentary. And this is a clear duality that we have with hip hop. The author also highlights how hip hop have been able to carry forward the cultural and the political spirit of the black arts movement. All of this is amazing, but there's a reason why there are a lot of discussions surrounding hip hop and women. Hip hop was and still is a great tool for freedom, but there are some limitations and some contradictions that appear quite quickly that are explored in this book. One is having people who come from oppressed communities and that become oppressors. That's a big thing. That is a big thing. And other issues stem from the huge popularity of hip hop. Once hip hop became popular and once it became a way for artists to make money, um, company and businesses started to be heavily interested. So there was a danger for hip hop to lose its essence, to lose its authenticity once it entered the mainstream markets. Also, once corporate interest entered, there was a big risk for hip hop to become commodified, to lose its soul and to lose its message. There was a risk for the essence of hip hop to be overshadowed by financial interests, the race for profit, diverging interests, and divisive agendas. So, yeah, that's a lot. And I haven't even started to speak about women and the place of women within hip hop. So, another issue is that hip hop came up as a cultural movement that is supposed to be the voice for people, the voice of people. So it should be a voice for women too. And that's where Gwendolyn comes off strong. She shows how black women have taken a place in hip hop and how they have used rhythm, language, words, storytelling, creativity to challenge stereotypes, to reclaim visibility, and to carve a space for themselves within the public sphere where they could express themselves and tell their stories on their own terms, which is to be applauded. However, the issue is that very often women's contributions have been minimized. And in this book, the author is really brilliant at placing this difficulty within a long standing pattern of Black women challenging to find their place within social and cultural movements and to have their own voice without facing censorship. There was always a difficulty and a tension between being able to speak up for oneself and having to protect the community. Which leads us to chapter 2 and 3, where the author talks a bit more about the controversial aspect of the relationship between hip hop and black women.